Alright, let's get to the next big movie, which is really the only big movie of this week, which is The Conjuring 3, that's going by The Devil Made Me Do It, which if you've been here long enough, you know that I'm pretty much in love with the first Conjuring movie especially, and I really like the second one also. And of course, since then, we've kind of been building this whole franchise that's been going off in different directions, where we've had stuff that's really good and almost, but not quite up to par with those two, like Annabelle Creation. But Annabelle Comes Home was decent enough and a lot better when I saw it a second time. But then we've got other stuff over here, like the first Annabelle and the Curse of La Llorona and the Nun, which are not up to par by any means at all. And so these are the ones we kind of kept coming back to though. That we kept coming back to this franchise for was the ones with like the actual Conjuring name, the first and second, and it was known pretty early, like really early in the process, that James Wan would not be doing this one, which was an immediate red flag. I mean, even though there are some directors out there that are really talented, like David F. Sandberg, who did Annabelle Creation, and as far as horror goes, also did Lights Out. If I was going to choose somebody to have replaced Wan for a third Conjuring movie, that seemed like a no-brainer to go with Sandberg. But for reasons that I don't quite know off the top of my head, they didn't. Because obviously he's got, like, Shazam stuff, but I don't know that that would have crossed with this or not. I can't remember how far back the production was on this, but there was the sense that we're not going to, because there's a very specific feel the first two movies have that is really their strength, but just their atmosphere and the way they're shot and everything. That is clearly Wan's touch is what makes those what they are. And knowing that Wan, like, handpicked his choice for this, you would think would take the edge off a little bit, but he ended up choosing the Curse of La Llorona guy, which which was incredibly alarming, and and coming away from, like, even if I didn't know that kind of background going in, I would still have probably come away from this saying this is not near on the level of those other two movies, the two Conjuring movies anyway. Um, I don't even know if, like, if I were to do a ranking, it would be the first two Conjurings, then Annabelle Creation, then Annabelle Comes Home, and then probably this one. To where it's like it's a little lower than middle ground, but it's not as bad as like The Curse of La Llorona or The Nun. But and all those have their, like, even the shitty ones have at least one or two effective scenes. This one doesn't really have much that stands out really in any way, like whether it be individual scenes or what the story is or anything. Because they obviously have an interesting story here with the real life case, where it was the first case where they used a murder took place and they used the demonic possession, uh, sort of trying to. It's but the thing here's the problem though, is that there's a lot going on in this that kind of keeps, like, they kind of keep wanting to go off different paths, which is, you would think would be the case, like with Annabelle Comes Home, where it's like they were trying to set up a bunch of possibilities, like a bunch of different movies possibly, and so you can see it kind of trying to go in different directions, but it still kind of felt like its same confined story, whereas this isn't even trying to branch off into like other movies, as far as I know. It's just sort of going all over the place all the time. There's even like a whole side quest involving a similar murder where things are supposed to kind of connect, but it just kind of feels like we're keep getting farther and farther away from the story, and then we kind of have to whiplash ourselves back to where we were. And what sucks about that though is even the way they're handling it. isn't that compelling, I guess, because it was, to my understanding, that they were trying to get away from the haunted house thing a little bit to kind of try something else and see what else we could do. I know that there was a little bit there where they talked about wanting to maybe do like a werewolf movie in the vein of like an American Werewolf in London, and they even introduced a werewolf in Annabelle Comes Home, but they decided to take this other route. But obviously, starting as far as like saying, like, oh, we kind of want to branch off on of the things we've done before. We want to kind of give it a bit of a fresh feel and kind of do a type of story we haven't really done yet in this universe. So yeah, the first scene is another exorcism. So that's really bringing out the, oh, we've totally never been here territory before. Uh, so we've got the contorting bodies and all the cliches there. We even have, even though the movie's set in 1981, in what is supposedly the real universe, like real life, there is a blatant nod or two to The Exorcist, including the exact shot where the Exorcist is dropped off and he's under the light and all that. Despite the fact that this being 1981, The Exorcist already exists in this world, so that's weird. But yeah, and then it's clear right off that we're not going to be getting the slow burn that we typically have gotten, particularly from Juan stories. We're going to be getting a lot of the inane kind of jump scares really quickly. Those jump scares that don't even really affect the most vulnerable person to something like jump scares. They're just kind of in there, almost like it's a contractual obligation when you make a horror movie, that they just happen to be there for some reason, even though they don't really add anything to any sort of atmosphere, and nobody in any audience is really that affected by them. They're still just kind of in there because apparently they have to be. So it's not going to be the case like in the first Conjuring, when we had all of the, like, everything was sort of atmospheric and we kind of got to see certain things, and every now and then something would come out of the shadows. But it wasn't until like there was like a whole payoff aspect where it was much more in the second half when things started to get really sort of loud and jumpy and all that. And they kind of, the way they built up to that was, by the time it got to them pummeling us with jump scares, they had earned it by that point. So it was fine. But here we've got stuff like there's more than one involving a rat. Like, the horror cliche, like back from like the 80s, where something there would be a jump scare, but it was always a cat. Um, Apparently it's rats now. I guess rats are the in thing. And I don't think that's some sort of homage to tropes or anything like that. I think it's just, unskilled jump scares, basically. Um, and there's also a lot of stuff like as far as talking about there not really being any individual scenes that stand out as far as like a scare factor. Because you've got that in droves, especially in the first two movies, where like it's hard to pick one standout scary scene because there's so many and they take so many opportunities and do so many different things, and how they handle the scare. Um, and they're effective and memorable scenes, which you're not really going to find here. The closest I think we get is the waterbed scene, I guess, which I feel like in any of the other Conjuring movies would just be like a minor scene. Like the waterbed scene being maybe the most memorable, I guess, scare in this movie. As far as like the way it's built up, and then when we see it like through the bed and all that, is basically the equivalent of if the main scare in the first movie was when like Joey King is getting the blankets pulled off of her. Like imagine if that was like the one peak scare moment in the first movie. That would, like, as good as that scene is, that would mean fuck all for the rest of the movie. And that's pretty much the case here. But there's something else even, where they don't quite do the bed scene as well as they probably could have. Was there's always this moment where there's a lot of build up and like just sort of like you can sense something is just being menacing in like the first two movies, especially in the first movie, where these scare scenes go on for like a long time, and it's like the more like they're not in a hurry at all to get to the point where they just jump out and scare you. They want to like Juan really just wanted to relish in those moments where you're not quite sure what's going to happen or where the scare is going to come from, and they just milk it, but in the best way possible. And this movie's in a big old damn hurry to get to moments when like he like I feel like if this waterbed scene was in the first movie, like it would have stopped it when we kind of see the face, and then there would have been a bit of a scare, and then it would go on and do whatever. But no, in this one, of course, he pops out of the bed and has to grab the kid because, or she. I can't. There's some lines are blurry here of what's what, but yeah, and I don't know if that's I doubt that's intentional either. It just kind of feels like a mess in a lot of cases. This and there's also just kind of something looming over this in general. It's like I guess it'd be one thing if the movie was really well made and like on par with the greatness of the first movie. But since it's in a movie that's kind of subpar, it only kind of brings out more the question of is this in poor taste, being like a real story about a real murder and a real guy that was really killed, and you add this stuff to it. It's like I said, it's interesting to want to take like the moral high ground because like it really just depends on how well made the movie is. Like, yes, and it's like, would it be insulting if they knew they were in a movie that's not that great, that their story was depicted that way? But that aside, there's still stuff like that that's missing. I was talking about with like how they handle the bed scare. And another blatant example of this would be this scene towards the beginning when the character who's eventually on trial, Arnie, is working. And he's in a tree with a saw and doing that whole thing. And we get this one shot that's very Juan-like of us seeing him through the window, and the camera's kind of pushing in on the window like he's being watched. But then that's immediately followed by a shot of this, apparition or whatever you want to call it, is terrorizing everybody, just in the window watching him. And we kind of see it from his point of view. And we did get a similar shot, in the first movie. That amazing scene when the sheet went against the window, when it came down, there was something there. But it didn't, like, the camera wasn't drawing a lot of attention to it. It was just there in the background. It was really creepy. I'm creeped out just describing it right now. But to cut to that, like, immediately after you do that window shot, because something Juan did that I love in both movies is how he used there's a long time where he only uses the camera by itself to make it seem like characters are being watched. Like there's the whole point where we get the house tour at the beginning of the first movie, and that shot when they come in the house starts with the camera inside the house looking out at them, and then when they come in and we just kind of get these long shots of them walk around the house, because of the way that shot at the window was, we just feel like they're being watched every move they make now. And almost like those long take shots are less like just your normal long take shots and more like point of view shots in this really subtly sinister way. You're not going to find any of that here. We've totally abandoned that kind of thing. It's like, if something's going on, we want to show it to you right now, just so you know. Because we don't have the trust in our audience that Juan does, apparently. I had to look up something. There's a specific quote about how I said that Juan, like, handpicked the director after working on The Curse of La Llorona for some reason. And it says, his exact quote was, "While working closely on The Curse of La Llorona, I got to know him as a filmmaker and his ability to bring emotion to a story, and his understanding of mood and scares make him a perfect fit to direct the next Conjuring film." First off, I don't know if this was said before or after The Curse of La Llorona came out, Because the question that it immediately raises is, was there something lost in translation between what things were like on the set and how he was handling it versus how the final product ended up coming out? Because obviously there is a lot of middle ground territory in a production. Like, a lot of post production stuff can change a lot of what the movie ends up being. So it's like, maybe on the set he left a really big impression, but I know there's a lot of stuff here that makes me question. Like when he talks about his ability to bring emotion in a story. One thing that these movies have been doing, kind of more and more as they go on, is establishing the love story between Ed and Lorraine, which honestly you would think would be out of place, but they've been handling it so well up to this point, and how it's kind of been this gradual thing that's been going on in the franchise, that we're just kind of with that now. Like, that's like one of the things we want to see going into this. It's just like that little side thing, because it's like I was talking about how like there seems to be a whole lot of things they're trying to branch off into. One of the things I would not take out of this by any means is this relationship between Ed and Lorraine is like basically quickly becoming the heartbeat of the franchise, basically. And like, so all their scenes together are really great, especially when they kind of have those moments where they stop, and there's a couple of moments particularly devoted to them and their love story, and it's just been working. Like, as far as like actually giving the movie some breathing room, but not just these moments that are like taking a break from the scares. Like, they really put an effort into how you feel about them as characters and their relationship with each other. And it's like when you get to these like genuinely romantic scenes, like I said, you would think they would feel so out of place, but they just don't because the characters are so well established at this point. So that is still going strong, at least. But then when he gets here and he says his understanding of mood and scares makes him a perfect fit. That's where I'm uncertain. Like I said, surely something got lost in translation between the set and this movie. Because a lot of this is, like I said, handled in this way of like it doesn't even feel like there's hardly much mood. I mean, yeah, there's a few scenes that are well shot, as far as like the lighting goes and stuff like that, and the way they sort of reveal aspects of the scene or the set or whatever as it goes on. But as far as the atmosphere, whole thing, and the scare factor, just definitely there's something lacking this time, and it feels much more like one of those side movies, like something that's not like actually in the like it's not like something like it feels more like something that would be in like a spin-off kind of thing, as far as and not like an actual something with like literally being the Conjuring 3. It feels significantly lesser than that, which is really unfortunate. So, yeah, and as far as, like, to elaborate on that, I guess will be the whole thing of them trying to stray away from the haunted house thing, where the first and second movie are typically set in kind of the one location of the house, whereas this is going to be all over the place as they kind of do the investigative thing. And I know that because this is what Ed and Lorraine did, like this is what they do, you would think that it would be interesting to like get to see more of the investigating aspect of the whole thing. But the problem with that is that the whole investigating thing is basically every supernatural movie in existence, especially in like the last couple of decades or so. That's what every supernatural movie is there is some sort of spirit that's pissed off and killing people, and so there's a group of characters here that has to investigate, go through a character actor or two that's just getting a paycheck to get some exposition, and then eventually we get some tragic backstory of what made this ghost what it is, and then they have to do something related to the past to get this ghost to go away. Either make it happy or shun it away, whichever happens. And that's just the whole ghost formula at this point, and has been for quite some time. And that's really all this movie is. It's just another one of those. And there's nothing that, like, makes... Like, you could say... Like, dude... Like, the whole thing about, doing a werewolf movie seems very... whatever. But the reason I feel like it would be interesting is taking a werewolf movie and giving it the Conjuring touch, because it's like I said, they've clearly got an established atmosphere where you can tell them apart between other horror movies. Um, Not just because they're significantly more well made than most horror movies nowadays. Like I said, they have such an established atmosphere that you get that vibe. And adding that to these other things would be interesting. That might seem, like, oh, we've kind of been there before, like that. But like I said, this doesn't have that vibe of taking something we already know but adding its own thing to it. It just feels like that old thing is all it really is. So that's where I actually kind of feel like it fails the most, is not being able to give more to that concept of just the investigating aspect. So it feels like really routine, like we have seen this, like it's they were trying so hard to stray away from their own two movies that they forgot to stray away from what the genre itself has been doing for quite some time already. You kind of that probably could have been something else that you looked into, but like I said, I feel like if they had brought like Sandberg in, if they had to give to somebody that wasn't one, I feel like we could have really had something, because Sandberg's an incredible horror director. Like he's, like I said, Annabelle Creation and Lights Out absolutely freak me the fuck out. And this, there's like really nothing in here that does that. Um, like after you've seen a horror movie, and it might leave an impression, but if it's just, another horror movie and you've seen a shitload of horror movies, there it might be like, oh, I'm not like scared out of my mind, but there were some freaky moments in there, but I'm good now and I'll move on. But then like when you're alone and it's like at night, and everything's quiet and the house is dark, there might be a scene or two that you remember, and it kind of suddenly becomes freakier in retrospect. Um, this doesn't really have any of those. So, like, not even in retrospect will something kind of stand out a little bit. It's just here, and it does the routine horror thing. Like I said, not even routine for Conjuring. Like, routine for a Conjuring movie would probably be okay. But the fact that it's routine for horror lately in general, um, is unfortunate. So, um, yeah, I was talking about, like, you usually come across an actor who you might recognize when you're doing the investigating aspect in any horror movie. In this case, we've got John Noble, who obviously you'll remember from, like, Return of the King, who's... It's nice to see... Like, he's one of those cases where it's, like, just his presence alone added significantly more weight to his scenes than were really would have been there otherwise. Like these scenes just like on the script page would just be nothing. But just his presence alone, it's kind of like there's something there that makes his scenes a little more memorable than they should have been. And another thing I kind of forgot to mention that I probably really should, that's a compliment, is this actress, Eugenie Bondurant, I think, is her name, and she's the one that's kind of playing the antagonist here. And she doesn't. They don't have to put her in like a shitload of makeup or anything like that. Just kind of her looking like her in just kind of costume. Like she has like more horror-y looks throughout it, but when she just looks like herself, is so effective, and it's not to insult the actress as far as like her presence, like she really owns that, and like your attention's immediately drawn to her when she's on screen, which is the kind of thing you would want out of this type of character. But like I said, the story itself is so whatever that there's only so much weight she can personally bring to it, but the weight that she brings is pretty much the only weight that's there. So major props to her for getting that as far as she did, but overall the whole thing is just still kind of unsatisfying, at least to me. So, but and I know, like, I can't even say my expectations were that high, because I was really concerned about one not being the director and the fact that it was the La Llorona guy. So it's not even necessarily that I'm trying to like say, oh, I went into this expecting something on par with 1 and 2, which is why I don't care for it. No, I just kind of in general don't care for it. A lot of it is quite boring, actually. because it's the kind of stuff we've seen so much before. And I just kind of, like, I had to really try to keep my mind from just wandering off and saying I don't really give a shit anymore. Especially when they bring in that second murder, is where it really feels like it's kind of going in too many directions, and it's like, I don't know. So, yeah, but guys, there's a lot of horror. We've already had a lot of horror in just like the last week or so, and there's going to be a lot more coming throughout the year. So hopefully, that can kind of bring us back. There's a lot of horror to look forward to this year. Probably a lot of horror that's off the radar. There was so much off the radar horror last year. There were like 50 horror movies last year, many of which were varying degrees of really good. And so we can hopefully there's more of stuff like that throughout the year. With this being even with I guess non-existent expectations, I could still easily say this is disappointing, to say the least. So, um, yeah. So I think next week is In the Heights, I think, and the Drive-In is getting A Quiet Place 2, so I'm just probably gonna go see A Quiet Place 2 again, and I will be seeing and talking about In the Heights as well, though, and I feel like there's something else, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.